What if wisdom doesn't come with age, but with the courage to see the world through someone else's eyes? Grace Hartley had spent 47 years believing she had life figured out. She'd raised 3 children on her own after her husband left when the youngest was still in diapers. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. She'd survived cancer, bankruptcy, and more heartbreak than most people face in a lifetime. If anyone had earned the right to feel wise, it was Grace. So when her best friend, Lauren, asked if she could watch her 12-year-old son for the afternoon, Grace said yes without hesitation. How hard could it be? She'd raised 3 kids. She could handle one preteen for a few hours. "Thank you so much," Lauren said, practically pushing her son through Grace's front door. "I have this work emergency and Michael's sitter canceled last minute. You're a lifesaver." Grace looked down at the boy standing in her entryway. Michael was thin and tall for his age, with shaggy brown hair that fell into his eyes and a backpack covered in patches and pins. He wore headphones around his neck and kept his gaze fixed on his sneakers. "Hi, Michael," Grace said warmly. "Come on in. Make yourself at home." The boy mumbled something that might have been thanks and shuffled past her into the living room. He dropped his backpack on the couch and pulled out a sketchbook. Immediately hunching over it with a pencil, Lauren gave Grace a grateful hug. "He's quiet. Won't be any trouble. I'll be back by 5. And then she was gone, leaving Grace alone with a child she barely knew. Grace stood in the doorway, watching Michael draw. He was completely absorbed, his pencil moving in quick, confident strokes across the page. She couldn't see what he was working on, but there was something almost meditative about the way he moved. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I can make sandwiches." "No, thank you." His voice was soft, polite, but distant. "Okay? Well, let me know if you need anything." She retreated to the kitchen, feeling oddly awkward in her own home. This wasn't like her grandchildren, who were loud and demanding and filled every space with noise. Michael seemed content to exist in his own world, not needing or wanting anything from her. Grace made herself tea and tried to read a book, but she kept glancing toward the living room. The silence was unnerving. After about 30 minutes, curiosity got the better of her. She walked back into the living room and sat in the chair across from Michael. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Michael's hand paused. He looked up at her with gray eyes that seemed older than 12. "Just stuff, can I see?" He hesitated, then slowly turned the sketchbook toward her. Grace's breath caught. The page was filled with an incredibly detailed drawing of a bird, a crow, she thought perched on a branch. But the bird wasn't just realistic. It was somehow expressive, its eyes holding a depth of emotion that seemed impossible for a simple sketch. "Michael, this is incredible." The boy shrugged. "It's okay. Okay. This is better than anything I've ever seen. Do you take art classes?" "No, I just draw." Grace leaned forward. "How long have you been drawing like this?" "I don't know. Always, I guess." "Your mom must be so proud." Something flickered across Michael's face. He pulled the sketchbook back and returned to drawing. "She thinks it's a waste of time." The words were matter-of-fact, not bitter or angry, just sad. "A waste of time." Grace repeated, shocked. "Why would she think that?" "She wants me to focus on school, on math and science. She says art isn't a real career." His pencil moved faster now, adding shadows to the bird's feathers. "She's probably right." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. She knew Lauren, had been friends with her for over a decade. Lauren was practical, driven, focused on success and stability. But this felt different. This felt like dismissing a child's soul. "Can I tell you something?" Grace said quietly. Michael glanced up. "Okay? When my daughter Emma was about your age, she wanted to be a singer. She had this beautiful voice, pure and clear like bells. She'd sing all the time. In the shower, while doing homework, walking down the street. It drove my ex-husband. It's crazy. He said she needed to focus on real subjects. That music was a hobby, not a future." Grace paused, the memory painful even after all these years. So I pushed her too. Made her join the debate team and the math club. Told her she needed practical skills. And you know what happened? Michael shook his head. She stopped singing. Just ... stopped. And she never started again. Now she's 32 years old with a job she hates and a voice she never uses. Grace's voice cracked. I stole something from her. I didn't mean to, but I did. I stole her joy because I was too afraid to let her follow it. Michael stared at her, his pencil frozen mid-stroke. Don't let anyone steal your joy, Michael, Grace said firmly. Not even people who love you. Especially not people who love you. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He blinked them back quickly, looking down at his drawing. It's just ... I don't know if I'm good enough. What if she's right? What if I'm wasting my time? You're 12 years old. You're not supposed to have it all figured out. You're supposed to explore and create and make mistakes and try again. Grace stood and walked over to sit beside him on the couch. Can I see the rest of your drawings? Michael hesitated, then handed her the sketchbook. Grace flipped through page after page of stunning artwork. Landscapes, portraits, abstract designs, animals, each one more impressive than the last. This wasn't a hobby. This was a gift. Michael, you have something rare, something special. I've lived almost half a century and I've met maybe 3 people with this kind of talent. Really? Really? Grace looked at him seriously. But talent isn't enough. You need courage too. The courage to believe in yourself even when other people don't. I don't know if I have that, he whispered. Then I'll believe for both of us until you do. Something changed in that moment. Grace saw it in Michael's face, a shift, a softening, a tiny spark of hope. And she realized this afternoon wasn't about babysitting. It was about something deeper, something neither of them had expected. Can one conversation change the entire direction of a life? After their talk, something shifted between Grace and Michael. He opened up slowly, like a flower unfolding in morning light. He told her about school, how he struggled with reading because the letters seemed to jump around on the page. How other kids made fun of his drawings. How his teacher said he was distracted and unfocused. But when I draw, he said quietly, everything makes sense. The whole world gets quiet and I can finally breathe. Grace understood. She'd felt that way about writing once, a lifetime ago, before responsibility and survival took over, before she convinced herself that dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Come with me, she said suddenly, standing up. I want to show you something. Michael followed her upstairs to her bedroom. Grace opened her closet and pulled down a box from the top shelf. It was dusty, the cardboard soft with age. She hadn't opened it in years. She carried it downstairs and set it on the coffee table. Michael watched curiously as she lifted the lid. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with her handwriting. Stories she'd written in her 20s and 30s, before life got too busy, before she decided writing was impractical. I wanted to be an author, Grace said, pulling out one of the notebooks. Not just wanted. I was convinced I would be. I had this whole plan I'd write in the mornings before my kids woke up, submit to publishers, eventually quit my day job and write full-time. What happened? Michael asked. Life happened. Bills and responsibilities and 1,000 small defeats. I got rejection letters from publishers. My husband told me I was wasting time. Eventually, I started believing him. She ran her hand over the worn cover of the notebook. I haven't written a story in 15 years. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, do you miss it? Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Every single day. Then why don't you start again? The question was so simple, so innocent, so devastating. 'Cause I'm scared, Grace admitted. Scared I'm not good enough. Scared I've waited too long. Scared that if I try and fail, it will hurt more than not trying at all. Michael picked up one of the notebooks and carefully opened it. He read a few lines, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked up at her with those 2 old eyes. This is really good, he said. Like, really good. You should finish it. Grace laughed, but it came out like a sob. It's been 15 years, Michael. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start anywhere? He said, echoing her own words back to her. You told me I'm not supposed to have it all figured out. Maybe you're not either. Grace stared at this 12-year-old boy who somehow saw through all her defenses and excuses. And she realized something profound. She'd spent the afternoon thinking she was teaching him, when really, he'd been teaching her. You're right, she said quietly. You're absolutely right. They spent the next hour reading through Grace's old stories together. Michael asked questions about characters and plot and why she'd made certain choices. His questions were insightful, thoughtful, showing a depth of understanding that surprised her. It's character, he said, pointing to a description in one story. She's sad, but she doesn't know it yet. She thinks she's just tired. Grace blinked. How did you know that? I never explicitly said. You don't have to say it. It's in the way you describe her, the way she moves through the world. Michael looked up. That's what's cool about art. You can say things without saying them. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. This boy, this quiet, overlooked, 12-year-old boy had just articulated something she'd been trying to explain to people for decades. You're going to be extraordinary, she told him. Not because of your talent, though that's undeniable, but because of your ability to see beneath the surface, to understand the emotional truth of things. Michael's cheeks flushed. My mom says I think too much, that I need to be more practical. Your mom loves you, Grace said carefully, but she's wrong about this. Thinking deeply, feeling deeply, that's not a flaw. That's your superpower. They kept talking, trading observations about art and life and creativity. Grace pulled out her laptop and showed Michael some famous artists: Van Gogh, Frida Kahlo, Jean-Michel Basquiat. She told him their stories, how they struggled, how they were dismissed and rejected, how they created anyway because they had no choice. Van Gogh only sold one painting during his lifetime, Grace said. Everyone thought he was wasting his time. Now his work hangs in museums around the world. Success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Michael absorbed every word, his eyes bright with interest. And Grace realized this was the most engaged she'd felt in years. Not just present, but alive, connected, purposeful. Around 4 o'clock, Michael's stomach growled loudly. They both laughed, and Grace made grilled cheese sandwiches comfort food, simple and perfect. They ate at the kitchen table, and Michael told her about a graphic novel he wanted to create. A story about a boy who could bring his drawings to life. That sounds amazing, Grace said. Have you started it? Just sketches. I don't know if I can write the story part. I'm not good with words like you are. Want to know a secret? Grace leaned forward conspiratorially. The first draft of anything is always terrible. The magic happens in the revision. You just have to be brave enough to start. Will you help me? Michael asked suddenly. With the story part, Grace's heart swelled. I would be honored. They shook hands solemnly, sealing their partnership. And in that moment, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Excitement about creating something new. When Lauren arrived at 5 o'clock to pick up Michael, she found them sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by notebooks and sketch paper, laughing about a particularly ridiculous character idea. Wow, Lauren said, surprised. You two look like you're having fun. Michael jumped up, his face flushed with happiness. Mom, Grace used to be a writer, and she's going to help me with my graphic novel. And she showed me all these artists who slowed down. Lauren laughed. That's great, honey. But we should let Grace rest. I'm sure she's exhausted. Actually, Grace said, standing up, I was hoping Michael could come back next week. We have a project we're working on. Michael's face lit up. Really? Can I, Mom? Please. Lauren looked between them, something unreadable in her expression. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, Grace said firmly. I'm asking if that's okay with you. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. Okay, If Grace doesn't mind, you can come back next Saturday." Michael hugged Grace quick and impulsive before she could react. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." After they left, Grace stood in her quiet house, looking at the notebooks still scattered across the floor. At the stories she'd abandoned. At the life she'd convinced herself was over. And she realized Michael had given her something she'd lost years ago. Permission to try again. What if the students we teach end up being our greatest teachers? The following Saturday came quickly. Grace had spent the week in a state of nervous excitement she hadn't felt since her 20s. She'd pulled out more of her old notebooks, read through them with fresh eyes, and terrifyingly started writing again. Just small things. Character sketches. Scene fragments. Words flowing from her fingers like water from a long-closed tap. When Michael arrived, he had his backpack stuffed with sketchbooks and a 3-ring binder filled with loose drawings. They spread everything out on Grace's dining room table and got to work. Michael showed her his concept art for the graphic novel A Boy Named Atlas, who discovers he can make his drawings come to life, but only at night. The drawings were stunning, atmospheric, full of shadows and light. "This is the main character," Michael said, pointing to a sketch of a lonely-looking boy with messy hair. "He doesn't have any friends, so he draws them. But they disappear when the sun comes up." Grace felt her throat tighten. "Michael, is this about you?" He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Maybe a little. They've worked on the story together." Grace asked questions, Michael sketched answers. They built the world page by page, scene by scene. Grace taught him about story structure, beginning, middle, end, conflict, and resolution. Michael taught her about visual storytelling, how a single image could convey what might take paragraphs to write. "See here?" Michael pointed to a drawing of Atlas sitting alone at lunch. "I don't need to say he's lonely. You can see it in the way he's hunched over, the way the empty chairs around him create negative space." Grace studied the drawing. "That's brilliant. Show, don't tell, that's what every writing teacher says, but you're doing it naturally." "It's easier to show with pictures," Michael said. "Words are harder. Words are just another kind of picture," Grace countered. "They paint images in people's minds. You're doing the same thing, just with different tools." They worked for 3 hours straight, barely noticing the time pass. When they finally took a break, Grace made hot chocolate and they sat on her back porch watching birds at the feeder. "Can I ask you something?" Michael said quietly, "Always." "Why did you stop writing?" "Really?" Grace took a long sip of her hot chocolate, gathering her thoughts. I think I stopped because I was afraid of failing. And somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that not trying was safer than trying and falling short. But you were good. Your stories are really good." "Thank you. But good doesn't always feel like enough when you're comparing yourself to everyone else. When you're getting rejected over and over. When people you love tell you it's not practical." Grace looked at him. "Does that make sense?" Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's safer to say you're not trying than to try and have people tell you you're not good enough." "Exactly." "But that's sad," Michael said, "because then you never get to do the thing that makes you happy." Out of the mouths of babes, Grace thought. This 12-year-old had just articulated what she'd been too scared to admit for 15 years. "You're right. It is sad, and I'm not going to let that happen to you." "Or to you," Michael added firmly. Grace smiled. "Deal." Over the following weeks, their Saturday sessions became routine. Michael would arrive with new drawings, Grace with new story ideas. They challenged each other, pushed each other, created something neither could have made alone. The graphic novel was taking shape, a beautiful, haunting story about loneliness and imagination and finding where you belong. But more than that, something was shifting in both of them. Michael was gaining confidence, speaking up more, showing his work to other people. And Grace was rediscovering parts of herself she'd thought were dead, her creativity, her passion, her belief that art mattered. One Saturday in early November, about 2 months after that first afternoon, Lauren came to pick up Michael and asked if she could talk to Grace privately. Of course, Grace said, her stomach nodding with worry. Had she overstepped? Was Lauren going to end their sessions? They sat in the kitchen while Michael packed up his things in the living room. Lauren looked uncomfortable, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug Grace had given her. I need to thank you, Lauren said finally, and apologize. Grace blinked. Apologize? For what? For not seeing my own son clearly. For dismissing something that's so important to him. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. His teacher called me last week. Said Michael has been more engaged in class, more confident, making friends. She asked what had changed. And I realized, it was you. Whatever you've been doing with him these past few months, it's working. Lauren, I haven't done anything special. I just listened to him. Let him be himself. That's more than I've been doing. Lauren wiped her eyes. I've been so focused on his future, on making sure he has opportunities, that he's prepared for the real world, that I forgot to see who he actually is. He's an artist, Grace, and I kept trying to make him something else. Grace reached across the table and squeezed her friend's hand. You're a good mom. You want what's best for him. That's not wrong. But I was going about it the wrong way. I was projecting my fears onto him. My dad was an artist, a painter, and he struggled his whole life, could barely pay bills. I watched my mom work 3 jobs to support us. I didn't want that for Michael. I understand that fear, Grace said gently. But Michael isn't your father, and the world is different now. There are more paths, more possibilities. He can be an artist and have stability. They're not mutually exclusive. Lauren nodded, sniffling. I know. I'm starting to see that. And I want to support him. Really support him, not just tolerate it. She looked up at Grace. Would you? Would you be willing to keep working with him? Not just on Saturdays, but maybe more often. I'd pay you, of course. Absolutely not, Grace interrupted. I'm not doing this for money. Doing it because Michael is remarkable. Because she paused, surprised by the emotion in her own voice. Because he's helped me more than I've helped him. Lauren smiled through her tears. That's what he says about you. They hugged and Grace felt something heal inside her chest. A wound she'd been carrying for 15 years. Ever since she'd pushed her own daughter away from her dreams. When Michael came to say goodbye, Grace pulled him aside. Your mom and I talked. She's proud of you. Really proud. Michael's eyes widened. She is. And she wants to support your art. She asked if we could work together more often. Really. His face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, so I'll see you Tuesday after school. Yes. Michael hugged her tight. Thank you, Grace, for everything. After they left, Grace sat at her dining room table looking at the pages of their graphic novels spread out before her. 50 pages done. At least 100 more to go. It was ambitious. Maybe impossible. But for the first time in 15 years, Grace believed it was worth trying. She opened her laptop and pulled up the novel she'd started writing all those years ago. The one she'd abandoned after chapter 3. The one she'd convinced herself wasn't good enough. And she started typing. How do we measure a life well lived? Is it in the achievements we accumulate or the connections we forge? 6 months after that first Saturday, Grace and Michael finished their graphic novel. 147 pages of story and art, collaboration, and courage. They called it The Night Artist, and it told the story of a lonely boy who learned that the things we create are never really lost. They live on in the people they touch. Grace had submitted it to a small independent publisher on a whim, expecting nothing. So when the acceptance email came, she'd stared at her computer screen for a full minute, convinced it was spam. But it wasn't spam. It was real. They wanted to publish The Night Artist. They loved it. They thought it could be successful. Grace called Michael immediately. He screamed so loud she had to hold the phone away from her ear. They celebrated that weekend with cake and sparkling cider. And Lauren cried happy tears and admitted she'd been wrong about everything. But more importantly, Grace had finished her novel. The one she'd started 20 years ago. She'd completely rewritten it, drawing on everything she'd learned working with Michael about vulnerability and courage and the importance of creating from a place of truth. She'd submitted it to agents and was waiting to hear back. The waiting was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. It's because even if nothing came of it, she'd done it. She'd tried. She'd been brave enough to fail. On a warm afternoon in May, Grace sat in her backyard with Michael, watching butterflies dance around her flower garden. They were working on ideas for a second graphic novel, this one about a girl who could hear the stories that objects held. The memories embedded in everyday things. Grace, Michael said suddenly, I was thinking about that first day. When my mom left me here, I was so nervous. Didn't want to be here. Grace smiled. I could tell. But now, it's my favorite place. You're my favorite person. He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. You changed my life. You know that, right? Grace felt her throat tighten. Michael, you changed mine too. More than you'll ever know. How? You're the one who taught me everything. No, Grace shook her head. You taught me. You taught me that it's never too late to be brave. That creativity isn't a waste of time, it's what makes life worth living. That the things we make matter, even if we're scared they won't. She reached over and squeezed his hand. You gave me my life back, Michael. The life I'd given up on. Michael smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. So, we saved each other. Yeah, I guess we did. They sat in comfortable silence, two artists separated by 35 years, but connected by something deeper than age, by understanding. By seeing each other clearly and choosing to show up again and again. Grace thought about all the years she'd lost to fear. All the stories she hadn't written, the dreams she'd abandoned, the person she'd stopped being. She couldn't get those years back. But she could choose differently now. She could choose courage. She could choose creation. She could choose to believe that her voice mattered, and she had Michael to thank for that. This quiet, overlooked 12-year-old boyhood walked into her life by accident and shown her what she'd been missing. A few weeks later, Grace got the call. An agent wanted to represent her novel. Said it was beautiful and heartbreaking and exactly what the world needed right now. Grace sat in her kitchen, listening to the agent's enthusiastic voice, and felt 15 years of doubt crack open like an egg, releasing something bright and new. She called Michael first, even before her own children, 'cause he would understand. He would know what this meant. You did it, he shouted. Grace, you did it, she corrected. I couldn't have finished without you. Without this. She gestured around her house, even though he couldn't see her. Without everything you taught me. But I'm just a kid. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me everything that matters. Grace's voice was thick with emotion. You taught me that life isn't over until we decide it's over. That it's never too late to try. That the people who see us really see us are the ones who change us forever. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then, that's what you did for me, too. They talked for another hour about the future and possibilities and all the projects they'd work on together. When Grace finally hung up, she sat in the golden afternoon light streaming through her windows and felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the naive hope of youth, but the hard-won hope of someone who'd lost everything and found it again. Who'd given up and chosen to return. Who'd believed the best parts of her life were behind her, only to discover they were just beginning. Grace thought about that first afternoon with Michael. How she'd approached it as a favor, a simple babysitting job. How she'd had no idea it would become the most important afternoon of her life. Because that's how transformation works, she realized. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through quiet afternoons with unlikely teachers. Through connections that sneak up on you. Through 12-year-old boys with sketchbooks who see right through your defenses to the truth underneath. Michael had taught her more about life in one afternoon than 47 years ever did. About courage and creativity and the importance of showing up fully, even when especially when you're scared. And the greatest lesson of all, that we're never too old to learn, too broken to heal, or too late to begin again. Grace opened her laptop and started a new document. Another story, another chance, another act of courage. And this time, she wasn't afraid. Because she'd learned from the best teacher she'd ever had, a quiet boy with gray eyes and a gift for seeing beneath the surface, who'd reminded her that the things we create, the connections we forge, and the courage we summon are what make us truly alive. The afternoon sun stretched longer across the floor. Birds sang outside her window. And Grace typed the first words of her next story, knowing that whatever came next, she would face it as an artist, as a writer, as someone brave enough to keep trying. All because one afternoon with her friend's son had taught her the most important truth she'd ever learned. It's never too late to become who you were always meant to be.